Views and opinions expressed in this production are those of the individual and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Shooters Nation or our sponsors. Information provided on this show is not a replacement for legal counsel or professional training. Listener and viewer discretion is advised. This is especially true on live shows.
Welcome to the Shooters Nation podcast, the show created for you, the armed citizen. Join our hosts and subject matter experts as we talk about guns and gear, practical training and knowledge, Second Amendment issues, and the firearms culture. Be sure to join us after the show at shootersnation.com and become part of the Shooters Nation.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Shooters Nation podcast. I'm your host, David Yancey, coming to you from our studio just outside of Nashville, Tennessee. And with me tonight is the man, the myth, the legend, Patient Zero, Mark Lancaster of Squared Away Customs in New Hampshire, looking remarkably well for Patient Zero. Yeah, I guess
I'm like 90%. I'm almost all 100% back. You know, I'm feeling much better. It really kicked my butt, but we're doing good now.
Almost got rid of the bubonic plague that you had there, and as you cough, right? So
yeah, no, I still have a tickle. Yeah, I still have a tickle in my throat and some stuff in my chest, but feeling much better.
Excellent. I'm glad you're feeling better, man. So how's it been going? You've had a busy week.
Yeah, I've had a very busy week, and just I'm going to put a note there for all the listeners. I am doing tactical daddy duty with a baby monitor in front of me tonight because my wife is away on business. So the 9-month-old is up in his crib, and I could disappear any given moment to go take care of that. So there's heads up for all us listeners out there.
If that happens, we will substitute another Mark, kind of like they did the sister in Roseanne when she disappeared after the first few episodes, right? So
I can just get a picture of me and throw it up on the green screen, and I'll just mute my mic and be quiet for a while.
Yeah, you could do that.
So you guys don't miss me.
Right? Be like, Mark, you're muted. Mark, you're muted. It's not really Mark. Yeah. So, all right. Well, so I guess just to take care of some business before we get rolling, because we've got a pretty good show, a lot of information to get out there this evening. I want to be conscientious of our time. We want to remind everybody that you connect with us after the show at shootersnation.com. That's where you can send us feedback and sign up for the Shooters Nation Mail Blast mailing list. You can also follow us on Instagram as @ShootersNationRadio. You know, I think I must have had grandiose ideas at some point that this would turn into a radio show, but whatever. And you can also follow us on Facebook as facebook.com/ShootersNation. While you're on Facebook, sign up for the Shooters Nation community. That's where you can interact with us, other listeners, and some of our guest subject matter experts. And finally, if you like what you're hearing, you can help support the show and make future episodes possible by becoming a Patreon patron at patreon.com/ShootersNation. If I do one more P word in there, it's going to be like Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled pepper, patrons, somethings. And you can also help support the show for free by leaving us positive reviews on iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, YouTube, etc. Do that if you like us. If you don't like us, just send us an email. Tell us that instead. So our guest tonight is a returning subject matter expert, Mr. Jason Demo. Listeners may recognize Jason's name from way back in episode number 5. Jason, welcome back, man. It's been a while.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. I think it was, we were talking earlier, I think it was March, so it's been quite a while.
Been nearly a year. Time has flown.
You guys have been rocking it, though, man. I've been listening to most of the episodes, and you guys have had a lot of good stuff. It was cool to kind of be in on the infancy stage and then see you guys with a lot of really good guests and a lot of really good information since I've been on. So it's been cool to see you guys grow.
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, it's been a really fun journey. I'm still not the smartest guy in the room, and I like it that way. So hanging out with folks like you and our other subject matter experts has made me a little bit better prepared for life. And man, I don't know. If I really had to look back and think about where we came from, I'm astounded. We're just fortunate to keep doing this. So our core conversation for the episode tonight is going to be essential civilian medical skills for mass casualty events, which is a mouthful. And specifically, we're going to talk about the things that you need to learn and the supplies that you should obtain in order to save your life and the lives of as many people around you as possible in an event like a terror attack, a natural disaster, man-made disaster, etc. And so, Jason, I know you've been up to some stuff recently. You know, you and I have kind of touched base here and there as we led up to recording today. What all have you been up to? Because I think that's kind of relevant to the conversation.
Yeah, I actually literally just got back from doing some photography for a shoot and save course down in South Florida with Bob Keller and D-Day Response Group. Half of the class was kind of tactical shooting, you know, rifle and pistol, and the other half was basic bleeding control and trauma stuff. That was 2 days over the weekend, and then right after that, I photographed their tactical emergency casualty care course for 2 days. So literally in the last week, I've been at 2 different medical courses, not as a participant, but as an observer. But it can still learn a lot, even though I've taken some of those courses before. But no, it's good to be around that. It's one thing I love about my job is doing training photography, because I can still observe and learn when I'm there.
It's like nothing like having us bring you on the show hot off of a whirlwind tour of doing a lot of medical photography and things like that. And then here we are talking about medical once again, right? So we're giving you a break from it, at least.
Yeah.
So not much of a break. Well, we appreciate you coming back on. It's great to see you again. Fantastic to be able to talk to you again. And, you know, to your point about being one of the first subject matter experts on the show way back in March, really appreciate, you know, your time even back then investing in us and taking a chance on us. So it's nice to see that we're still around. Mark hasn't gotten tired of me yet, and that's always a good thing. So not very many people in this world that haven't gotten tired of me yet. So,
I'm just glad you invited me back. So that means that my first episode couldn't have sucked too bad if you invited me back. So that's good.
No, you know, it's interesting. We'll have to offline talk about the show statistics and such. You know, the early shows, what's really encouraging for me is that the early shows are still getting listens. And, you know, if you were in there on the early days, obviously you've had more time for people to listen to your shows cumulatively since then. And, you know, yours is up there in the top 10. So, as far
that's because I actually listen to it every day just to pad the stats to make me feel better. So
I told you, David. I told you that was happening.
Right. Figured out how to make it your ringtone. So every time somebody calls you, it plays the episode. Yeah, that's cool. So, all right. Well, hey, I guess Florida's got a nice natural tendency to stuff ballot boxes and stuff. So, but
oh yes, we're experts at that.
Right. Yeah. I got that one in early. So I guess it's probably good to stop for a second and remind the listeners about the disclaimer that appears at the start of each show before we get into the conversation tonight. And so particularly what I want everybody to think about is that the information you're about to hear is provided for informational purposes only. It does not constitute professional training, and none of us are medical professionals, nor do we do any medical or do we have medical certifications that would authorize us to train you. And so we would encourage you strongly to seek out and obtain professionally led medical training conducted by certified medical trainers. And that's really the end of the disclaimer. And I guess the point there is that we hope to accomplish something on this episode that will open your eyes to what kind of training is out there and what kind of skill sets you should seek to learn. And also, I think, Jason, we're going to talk about the medical gear that people should keep nearby or on their person. But again, we're not, that disclaimer, it's the real deal. We're not going to teach you how to do any of this stuff tonight. So I feel like that's a very important thing. If you thought this was a correspondence podcast where you would learn how to save a life by listening to the audio, that's just not how it works, folks. This stuff doesn't come through by osmosis. You really have to get in a classroom setting and get your hands dirty and learn this stuff by repetition and by doing. So Jason, does that kind of sync up with what you were thinking as well, or
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's no different than firearms training. Like I can learn a lot of good information on a podcast, but I can listen to you all day, every day, and that's not going to make me a good shooter. I need to go seek out a professional firearms trainer, learn from them, and then practice what I learned from them. So, my goal for the episode would really just be to number one, encourage people to get quality training, and number two, encourage people to get quality gear. And hopefully, through our conversation tonight, we can kind of point people in the right direction for that.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. Mark, you and I talked about this several times, it seems like, and since summer moving forward, summer of 2018 moving forward, we kept saying we want to do a medical episode, and we had Dr. Sherman House on, and he kind of started that conversation for us. And then we said, well, we want to continue this. We want to really get in and talk about the nitty gritty on the, what should people learn? So this will be one of the last episodes that we release in 2018 as we head towards the holidays and take some time off to spend with our families and stuff. So I guess we kind of got in right under the wire and delivered on our promise of doing a medical show. So yeah, I'm going to check that off my bucket list, and I don't feel like a failure for, the conclusion of 2018. So, I guess we'll just kind of take the conversational format that we always do, and it might be helpful to just talk about our own levels of medical training, what we've had exposure to, what kind of classes we've been in, et cetera. Jason, you're our guest. How about you take the first shot at that one and tell us a little bit about your medical training background?
Yeah, definitely. So the first big disclaimer I will give, kind of like what you said earlier, is I am not a medical professional. I'm not a medic. I'm not a doctor. I'm not going to give any medical advice as far as this is how you do XYZ procedure. So I just want to throw that out there because I'm a big proponent of staying in your lane, and I don't want people to think that I'm a medical expert. I consider myself somebody that's always encouraged people to get medical training and whatnot, but I just want to make sure that's clear up front so there's no confusion. But yeah, to start, I went to the police academy in 2004. So you get your basic first aid there, CPR, AED. You learn how to deliver the fake baby with the dummy and all that stuff, which, you pray you're never going to have to do.
Right.
I don't remember any of that. And then, it's interesting. I actually had this conversation with somebody the other day. They were like, oh, you were in law enforcement. You must have gotten a ton of medical training. No, I got very, very limited medical training when I was in law enforcement. Most of my medical training was getting on the radio and calling for fire and EMS. That was my medical training. I left law enforcement in 2015, so only about 3.5 years ago. And when I left, I had never been taught through agency training how to even use a tourniquet.
Isn't that crazy?
It's kind of crazy to think about that.
Yeah.
But since then, different things have happened, the Parkland shooting, Pulse nightclub, and now you're getting, cops are getting quite a bit of medical training. So some of the medical training I got in law enforcement, I got kind of on my own that I had to seek out. It wasn't through my agency. And I worked for a very large agency in a major, city in Florida. So it's not like we didn't have solid training. But I am currently TCCC, so Tactical Combat Casualty Care certified. I'm also TECC, Tactical Emergency Casualty Care certified, which is kind of the civilian version of TCCC, which is kind of the military version of, your basic trauma training as far as medical training goes. And then I've also been through Odin Medical's Special Tactics and Operations Medic program, which is a 5-day program out in Tulsa. I've been to that. I've completed that. And then I've also been to it a second time earlier this year to photograph the whole course. So while I didn't participate the second time, I was around that. So that's kind of my main medical background, is kind of those two certifications and that training. I consider myself someone that's fairly confident to be able to somewhat keep you alive until the real professionals get there. I have the basic CPR, AED, your basic trauma, bleeding control. I've been trained in some advanced techniques like needle decompression or, surgical crikes, but I'm not certified to do those. So, we can get a little more into that later. Would I do that on my wife or daughter if they were dying in the backyard or, on a camping trip? Absolutely. If I roll up on a traffic crash and you need an airway, no, I'm not going to do a crike on you, So it's, we'll talk a little more about that later, but that's just kind of my basic background. But I'm a big proponent of basic CPR, AED, and basic bleeding control. I think those two things are really, really important.
Absolutely. Mark, how about you, man?
So my medical training is 0. I've had none.
Okay.
And it was really a goal for this summer was to really get into it and get more or get some and get a lot of it. And my plan was to forego the firearms training this year. I trained a lot last year with a gun, more than I've ever. And I tell you, man, it's just the baby. I'm using the baby excuse, but man,
yeah,
holy cow, it's just been a whirlwind of lack of time, and it's just been a real challenge getting it done. And part of the problem, I think, is geographically, because there isn't a lot of options for me way up in the Northeast. There isn't a lot of this type of med training that I can get my hands on without having an overnight or multiple day trips or something like that.
Yeah.
So that's kind of been part of the struggle, I think. I mean, if there was something that was an hour away that I could scoot away, that's probably not an issue.
Yeah.
But leaving for 3 days for training just wasn't in the cards for the summer.
Yeah.
So is Sawyer's 9 months old last week, so it won't be long and things will start easing up and being a little bit more flexible on our end. But for right now, it's all hands on deck helping out around here. And I think so. I haven't taken a firearms class or a medical class all year.
Right.
Which is as long as I've ever been with that one. That's for sure.
Well, I think honestly, several things jumped out at me as you were saying all that. Is that first of all, I think that you're in the position that a lot of our listeners might be on several fronts. The competing priorities of kids and work and just life, and it's hard to get that stuff in. And secondly, the fact that maybe a shout out to the industry in general that if you're listening and you own a gun shop or something like that where you do firearms training. Do what some of the shops around me are doing and start offering some civilian TAC med type classes, as well. And hopefully that the importance of that will kind of come through in the conversation tonight, because I know that all three of us are firmly in the same boat of feeling like tactical medicine isn't as cool to talk about. It seems like, you don't go hang around the water cooler at work and talk about, yeah, man, I had this great medical class this weekend. People's eyes start to roll in the back of their heads. But if you could talk about, a precision rifle class or a combative handgun class or, defensive, carbine class or something like that, everybody, their ears perk up and they want to hear more about it. It'd be great if we could make civilian tactical medicine or civilian trauma medicine cool the same way that firearms training is. So yeah. Well,
I mean, one thing I do have coming up, and that's next month, is I do have CPR.
Awesome.
My local gun range, I'm the vice president of, and we are hosting it's like a Red Cross class.
Yeah.
And we did one last month. I couldn't attend, had something going on, but we had a really great turnout. So we're going to continue to do one a month as long as we can keep filling them. So that's the first thing I'll be able to do. But that'll be right here in my town. So that's super easy. But I say that like I'm so busy with kids, I'm so busy with family. It's just like all the more reason I should have this type of training.
Yeah.
Like me saying that out loud is just like, oh my gosh, I need to make the time.
Yeah.
This isn't a matter of
right. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, it's definitely something I need to get working on. And I mean, my wife was a paramedic back in the day, so that's I feel a little bit more comfortable because she's always around. But it's still something I need to get involved in for sure.
Yep. No, I think again that probably resonates with a lot of people. I was in the position that you're in right now earlier this year, and then after having spoken with Jason and a few others on the show, it made me think, okay, I've got to do this. And so I started this year and did the CPR AED class. It was adult, pediatric, infant CPR, and automatic defibrillator. So did that through a Red Cross program. That was good. I enjoyed it. And then I think the following month or two later, I went and did a PHTLS class, which is pre-hospital trauma life support, sponsored by NAEMT, the North American EMT organization. And so that was an 8-hour, pretty Yeah, I'd say that if going into it, eyes wide open, not really sure what I was getting into. It seemed very heavy duty, but now having stepped back from it and let it all absorb in, that's a gateway class really for somebody that is wanting to get into trauma medicine. There's only so much you can teach in 8 hours, but man, it was like drinking from the fire hose. So I would say that, like Jason, I want to stay in my lane. I'm not some emergency medical, superstar or anything like that. I've been to one stinking class, but it was eye opening and showed me that I didn't know what I didn't know. And now I can do good with the equipment that they trained us on. So we'll talk about that a little bit too. But I'm kind of like in the middle between you two guys, I guess, right now.
Can I'm going to totally hijack the show and ask you guys questions. And I don't mean to put you guys on the spot, but I think this is an interesting question and perspective. And I think probably I would guess that most of your listeners are in this position, but both of you guys have been carrying firearms for years, right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Why would you say that it took you so long? And I don't mean that in like a negative way, but why would you say it took you so long to put a priority on medical training? Would you say it's complacency? Would you say it's just ignorance to the importance of it? I'm just curious from your perspective, because I think a lot of listeners would relate to that.
I think I always knew that it was important, but what I didn't realize is how 911 is not going to save the day, not necessarily. And I think it's really easy to overlook that if you don't know what you don't know. And the other thing is, like, I think a big thing for me is that it wasn't talked about.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah. It wasn't buzzing. It wasn't a buzz topic. It wasn't a conversation amongst our community. Until very recently. And I would say the last 2-3 years, more so in the last 2 for sure. And even more so, I mean, it's growing, obviously.
Yeah.
But it wasn't in my face, and it wasn't like, boy, I really need to do this. Like it's easy to overlook, and it's easy to focus on the cool stuff.
Yeah.
Sure.
When you get a few instances popping up in your life or friends of friends and so on and so forth, it's just like, man, like what a little bit of training would have done to the situation to make it better.
Yep. And
another thing is the world just seems more violent.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I would agree with that.
There are, more, and part of it's because it's in our freaking face so much because of social media and the 24-hour news cycle is just constantly in your face and thrown in your face and over and over and over and over. And it makes it out to be a very violent, nasty time to be living. And, you have small kids and you hear about school shootings, and then it's just like on the top of my mind. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so, yeah.
Yeah, I'd say for me, very much the same. The CPR class I took this summer was my third encounter with a CPR class. Way back in the day, teenage years, Boy Scouts, first aid, CPR, that was always a thing. So I knew the basics from that. Fast forward from that, 10 years or so, had a child that unfortunately isn't with me anymore, right? She was born with some complications, and we had 2 short but amazing years with her. But before we could even bring her home from the hospital, from the neonatal ICU, they made sure that we knew infant CPR because they just weren't going to let us walk out of there without that. So that was my second encounter, and this encounter with CPR was just kind of a basic right there. That's something that I can do without any special equipment whatsoever. Ideally, you want to use a face shield, especially if you're doing CPR on a complete stranger. I'll say that. I probably wouldn't do CPR on a complete stranger without a face shield. My family, friends, people that I know, I'm more comfortable with that. But the face shield, the barrier to keep bodily fluids from coming, from their mouth into my mouth. I'm not legally obligated to render care to a complete stranger. Heimlich maneuver, things like that. Yes, my family members absolutely will. Complete stranger, laying on the ground, blood coming out of their mouth and things like that. if I don't have safety gear, personal protective equipment, I'm going to let the pros handle that one. So, but like Mark, I think the current events in the world they're driving an awareness of trauma medicine for civilians. And that's both a terrible, just reprehensible thing that it's driving it, but it's also a good thing that's raising awareness. I wish the events weren't what they are to make this seem so necessary. But frankly, if I wanted to be that simple about it, I wish they weren't so bad that I could just leave a gun at home too. Right. And so that's kind of where I'm at with that. That's a good question. Don't feel like you're hijacking, because again, this is a conversation, and you're going to think about questions that Mark and I didn't. So please keep at that.
No, and I, in law enforcement, I feel like we were always, unfortunately, reactive instead of proactive in a lot of training.
Yeah.
You saw that, with Columbine. That Columbine happened, so it's like, okay, crap, we can't have patrol cops staging and waiting for SWAT anymore.
Right.
So then patrol cops started getting active shooter training. You have, incidents that happen in Florida, and most Florida, officers didn't have basic bleeding control or basic, trauma skills. So then you have these active shooter incidents happen. It's like, crap, we need to get cops, basic skills. We can't always just stage and wait for the medics to show up. So unfortunately, law enforcement is very reactive. And I think that even just as civilians, we can do that too. Like, well, nothing bad has happened to me, so
Right.
Why do I need to learn how to use a tourniquet? I've
Right.
never seen massive hemorrhaging in person, so why would I need a tourniquet? Or I've never been on a terrible scene or terrible accident or whatever. So we just as humans, we can get complacent.
Yeah, I think you make a good point about law enforcement being reactive, and the angle that I'm going to take that right now is I'm also going to add in emergency first responders, whether it's fire or EMS. They're reactive as well. They don't arrive until you call them. And that was another reason for me to want to learn more about bleeding control and airway relief and things like that, is that much like the police, the reason I carry a handgun for my self-protection and the protection of my family is because I know that I don't get to take a cop with me everywhere I go all day long. They're going to come as a reactive force to deal with a threat if it still exists, or to fill out a report after I've dealt with it. God forbid that really have to happen, right? So the same with EMS. They're going to show up after somebody's called them. And, we'll get into this, I think, as we go into the material, but part of that whole conversation of why should you get trained, rapid, large volume blood loss can be fatal. And I mean, that might be kind of a duh statement, but, a rupture to the femoral artery can result in death in under 3 minutes. And, if somebody stops breathing because they're choking, or they've had some sort of wound that's punctured their thorax, and now they've got pneumothorax condition happening that's keeping their lungs from functioning properly. After 5 or 10 minutes of not breathing, you're very likely to develop serious and possibly irreversible brain damage. So if you think 5 minutes, 3 minutes, those tick tock, the clock's ticking. How quickly can 911 get EMS to you? And if you're lucky, within that time period. But if not, I think Jason, you'd said very early on in the show tonight that I want to learn enough to keep a person alive until the pros get there. And that person might be me. It might be my wife, could be my kid, it could be a complete stranger, but I want to know how to do that so that I don't have to watch somebody that I care about, or even just as a basic human level, a human being. I don't want to have to watch another human being that maybe is a stranger to me pass away in front of my eyes just because I didn't know how to do a thing that is honestly pretty mechanical and fairly simple when you look at basic trauma medicine, right? So
absolutely. And a lot of people, they think of it along the terms or just kind of criteria of like, okay, this is more for people who live out in the middle of nowhere. Oh, EMS is going to be 15, 20 minutes away. You can live in a super urban area where EMS is everywhere. And by the time that 911 call goes to the call taker,
yeah.
The call taker takes the notes, transfers it to the dispatcher, and then dispatches the actual first responder, that can easily be 2 or 3 minutes already.
Yeah.
And like you said, if you have a femoral bleed, goodbye.
Right.
You're dead before they're even en route.
Right.
So it's not just for people that are in rural areas or in the middle of nowhere. You know, I love, you've had Ian from Ruin Nation on the show a couple times, and he's got his no one is coming to save you, and you are your own first responder. Like, he's always pushing that, and I love that because it's true. Because like, first responders are not first responders.
Right.
We're first responders now.
That's right.
Gone are the days of just random incidents here and there. No, like evil is coming to our doorsteps. At schools and churches and concerts and all this stuff. No, we're first responders.
Right. Yeah. The first person on the scene is the first responder, and that's going to be you, right? Or somebody, or you might be the injured party, and the first responder is going to be the person next to you, and you really hope that they know something about this. I live in fairly rural Tennessee. Mark, you're in fairly rural New Hampshire. Jason, I think you're kind of you're sort of rural now. Really, you've chosen to be in a rural area in Florida. Here where I'm at, agriculture is a big thing, and it's not uncommon. It's actually so common that you don't even hear about it much in the news anymore. But farm injuries, and that's heavy equipment. A guy can lose an arm in a farm injury pretty easy, and tourniquet will save him. And we've had cases of that happen locally where a pinching type accident where you get an arm gets pinched between two pieces of machinery and pops that arm right off. Tourniquet will save him. The old myth of taking your belt off and cinching that up and pulling it tight, that doesn't work. And I'm just going to throw that out there real quick. Myth busted. That is a terrible plan. That's not a plan at all. It's better than looking at it, but it's not really going to occlude the bleeding to the extent that would save a person's life generally, unless you're built like Atlas and you can pull that belt tight enough. So but yeah, I mean, so I've got some stats in front of me, and if we haven't driven the point home yet of why you should do this, let me just run through this real quick if you guys can bear with me. And I'm going to be transparent. I'm lifting this from the slides that the instructor gave us for our PHTLS class. Boston Marathon, April 15th, 2013, 2 pressure cooker bombs, 3 dead, 264 people injured. Within minutes, the threat status was unknown, but there were no further engagements. So, that was it. Like within minutes, 264 people injured, 3 dead. And that was a mass casualty incident with limited resources. The Orlando nightclub shooting, June 12th, 2016. Person with a semi-automatic rifle and 1 pistol, 49 dead, 53 injured. Within minutes, that turned into a hostage situation that lasted 3 hours. Some of the data that came out of that suggested that there were people that were killed instantly, but there were also people that likely bled out from injuries that could have been, they could have been saved had care been rendered to them quickly enough. So 53 people injured, 27 of those were hospitalized, with 6 of them in critical condition. Again, mass casualty incident with limited resources. And those limited resources are the limited resources of trained personnel and gear within close proximity to do something to save lives. Not the most recent one, but probably the biggest one in recent memory is the Las Vegas Route 91 festival shooting in October of 2017. Multi-semi-automatic rifles, bump stocks, that kind of thing. 58 dead, 851 people injured by a single assailant. Again, 851 people injured, 422 of the 851 were gunshot wounds. So roughly half. The other half could have been trampling injuries, could have been things like that. But really, what you have there is it's a scene that very quickly, in all these cases, they very quickly evolve into a combat mass casualty incident, which requires tactical medicine, and the first responders weren't really in close proximity. So the question then is, who knows what to do? Who knows where to start? Who has the gear to address the problem? And if the answer is not you or somebody near you, then again, you're waiting for that second responder. You're waiting for trained EMS. So that's really kind of why this is the world we live in. This is why we're talking about this today. Golly. So I'm going to also add one other thought that I've got in here. Jason, you're saying, we go through our daily lives and most of us will never have to pull a handgun in self-defense, unless, circumstances conspire against us and make it necessary to do that. But statistically, and I'm going to say that, what is it, 83% of all statistics are made up on the spot, but statistically, you're far more likely to encounter a medical emergency than you are to need to use your gun for self-defense. And when I say medical emergency, it could be a person choking on food in a restaurant, could be somebody falls, slips, hits their head in a store, anything like that.
How often you drive by a car accident.
Exactly that, right? So you're far more likely to encounter a medical emergency than you are to need to pull your gun on somebody. And furthermore, knives and guns, they're forbidden in a lot of places, courthouses, post offices, schools, in some states, places of worship, things like that. You can't take a firearm, amusement parks, airplanes, you name it. But it's extremely unlikely that anybody's going to stop you from carrying a tourniquet or, some compression gauze or something like that. So this is something that you can carry with you to deal with, your worst possible fear. And people aren't going to deprive you. You're not going to get frisked and have a tourniquet taken from you, most likely. You could take that into a concert and nobody's going to bat an eye, right? So anyway, that's just kind of my plea for people to listen to this and understand that this is relevant, it's necessary, and it might not be as cool as taking a tactical rifle class, but it's something that could save a life. Maybe more likely to save a life than that rifle class is. So, Jason, I'd really like to talk about what kind of training people should get. Are you okay kicking into that?
Yeah, definitely. So I think the first thing we have to ask ourselves, and I don't like basing things strictly on the probability of things happening, because if I'm basing my life on the probability of needing something, I'm not going to carry my gun every day, because I'm probably statistically not going to need my gun. I like to think of the possibility of something happening within reason, but going back to the probability, I'm going to kind of counteract what I just said, contradict it a little bit. But okay, what is the probability of medical incidents? What type of medical incidents is it likely that I could encounter on a day-to-day basis? And it doesn't have to be an active shooter, but a day-to-day basis. And then also on top of that, what as a civilian is preventable? If you're shot in the head, I'm not a trauma surgeon.
Right.
I'm sorry, that's just not, you got a 99% chance you're not going to make it or whatever.
Right.
But what are some preventable, probable causes of death that we can actually make a difference in if, we're those first responders that are first on scene?
Yep.
So kind of like what we were talking about earlier, I think the very most basic thing everybody needs to get is CPR and AED. CPR is very, very simple. And even now, they're starting to even get away. And I don't know, David, you can tell me, because did you go through CPR this year, you said?
I did. Yep.
Were they still teaching breaths? Because a lot of them are getting away from that and going to strictly compressions.
Yeah. So, the class that we went through for infants and children, they really go for breathing first and then compressions after. But for adults, they're talking about starting with compressions first and foremost. And they did say that for a person that might have some sort of liquid around their mouth or nose, whether it's blood or saliva or vomit, things like that, you can sometimes just flat skip the breathing and just do the chest compressions, because you're actually manipulating the lungs at the same time when you do it.
Yeah, and I'm going to tread carefully here because I'm not a medical professional, but
right.
It also depends, on what is the incident. If somebody had a heart attack,
yeah,
they just drop right in front of you. They have plenty of oxygen already in their bloodstream.
Yeah.
So breaths aren't as important as getting that blood circulating, through compressions.
Right.
Now, if you were choking and you've been choking for a few minutes, that's a different story.
Right.
But as far as just a day-to-day thing, I mean, how likely is it that somebody's going to have a heart attack around you or stop breathing or choke or whatever? Learning the Heimlich maneuver, just learning CPR. AED is simple. AED is stupid proof.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not the smartest guy in the world, but you turn on AED, it literally tells you what to do.
It does.
You can't really screw it up. It's not like you got to know what you're doing. Obviously you need to get trained in it, but when I went through my tactical emergency casualty care course, there were several guys that worked for Disney World in Orlando, their fire department. And they said they work 3 cardiac arrests every day on Disney property.
Wow, that's not surprising.
They average 3.
Well, yeah, I've got a fairly large size company that I work for, and each of our buildings probably holds several hundred people. In the past 3 years, we've had 2 heart attacks on premises that people did CPR and AED in the building to keep individuals alive until EMS arrived, and those people, the victims of that event, survived.
Yeah, I've got a buddy on Instagram, Embrace the Recoil. He finally went out and got some medical training after I'd been bugging him for a while, and him and his buddy gave somebody CPR that had a heart attack at I believe it was a shooting competition at the range.
Wow.
So we even sometimes get caught up in the sexy stuff like bleeding control and tourniquets and stuff, and that's what you think is going to happen at the gun range. No, there's a lot of people that are not always in the best shape or whatever, that like to shoot or whatever, and you never know when somebody's going to keel over.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of folks out there that look really healthy, and just heart disease runs in a family, and I know an individual that unfortunately he passed away, but he was a marathon runner in fantastic shape, did all the right things, had enough had a low enough body fat percentage that he made me sick. But he passed away, massive heart attack, and unfortunately they said that gentleman was deceased really before he ever hit the floor, and appearance, you just never know what somebody, the guy sitting next to you that's a picture of health could, keel over and clock starts ticking. Can you do something to save his or her life?
Yep. So that would be my first thing. And I think it's also important to tell people, where to go to get this training. I mean, we all have Google, but the Red Cross does lots of stuff. A lot of your fire stations will do stuff for you. A lot of your local hospitals, Centricare, stuff like that. At your doctor's office, all those people either offer classes or will point you in the right direction. And they're very inexpensive. They're usually only, 2, 3, 4 hours.
Right.
Very, very simple. Yeah.
A lot of churches do this, civic orgs, work. We've talked about even at our company, we used to offer CPR, AED classes, as part of elective training if you wanted to. For some reason, 2018, they didn't do that. We've talked about even in our own department using that as a team builder exercise. Hey, bring somebody in to teach a CPR AED class, and let's all do that. Company pays for those kinds of things, and we might still make that happen. But yeah, I mean, it's like free to maybe $70. I think I paid $70 for my class, and the interesting thing about that CPR AED class was I did the theory part of it, the book learning. I did that all online over the internet, and it's kind of computer-based training, had little simulations, and did that with little cartoon characters on the screen. And then I went into a local hotel conference center, and on a Saturday morning, I was there for 2 hours and did the practical side, the demonstration of I knew what I'd learned, or they kind of fine tune it with you, show me what you learned on the video. Okay, here's how it really looks, here's how it really feels. Let's work on the chest compression dummies and things like that. Man, I was in and out of there, like I said, in under 2 hours on a Saturday morning. And, you walk out with a 2-year certification in CPR, AED. And sometimes you can piggyback a first aid, basic first aid class off of that same thing. So, thinking about basic first aid, next step, I would think, tell me if you agree, you do CPR, AED, maybe go ahead and pick up that Red Cross first aid class. Yeah, it's going to be more of the, patient assessment and movement, scene assessment, injuries, what kind of traumatic emergencies. I'm starting to see, from what I've read, they're slipping more trauma into that because of current events. they're going to go over things like how to use personal protective equipment, like, nitrile rubber gloves and liquid barriers and things. And they also, believe it or not, they talk a little bit about the legal issues, right, of rendering first aid and things like that. And they'll help sort out a first aid kit. But we're at this level in the Red Cross first aid classes, and I've not attended one of those. I just skipped that, went to PHTLS, but I read the overview. The first aid kit there is really more like the kit that you buy at a big box store like Walmart or something, where it's got, the Band-Aids and the Neosporin and some gauze and a tongue depressor and stuff like that. It's not really geared up for trauma. So if it's going to cost you just another $20 on top of your CPR AED or something, I would say go ahead and do it. But then try to find something a little bit more advanced. Jason, what are you thinking? I mean, have you seen the basic first aid kits or training that they're doing lately, or?
I haven't been to any of the basic stuff in years, because I got all that with my first responder certification and stuff in law enforcement. I mean, there's definitely some good stuff in there to learn, but as far as saving somebody's life prior to the professionals getting there, that's not the best class for that. Right. I'm not saying people shouldn't take that. Like, it's good to have that, you're camping and your kid gets burned or whatever. Like, I want to know how to treat that, because it might take me 2 hours to get to the hospital or whatever, but that's not gonna, putting a burn dressing on my kid is not going to save their life.
Right.
So I never want to discourage training like that. But, when we're talking about active shooter response, preventable causes of death, that's a different, it's important, but that's a different ballgame.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's you're exactly right with the kind of things that you'd be learning in that. And so then that's where I personally skipped over into the pre-hospital trauma life support. And that was stuff from my experience in that. And of course, with PHTLS being prescribed by the NAEMT, there's a curriculum that you're going to follow in all these classes. Some instructors may give you a little bit more bonus material, but at the bare minimum, I believe this is accurate. For me, I learned about limb hemorrhage, bleeding control with a tourniquet, mitigating, correcting airway loss, either through manual restoration or a nasopharyngeal airway tube. That was an interesting experience, Jason. I volunteered to be the guy that they demoed that on. So
how did that gag you?
Funky, man. It was funky, right? So the instructor, we had the dummy that we could do that on, and we all practiced on the dummy. And he just kind of, threw it out there and said, "Hey, who wants to volunteer? Who wants to, have this done?" And that was, it's a room full of alpha guys, right? So you have a bunch of alpha male dudes sitting around there, and nobody was going to be chicken, but nobody volunteered either. There's a lot of trash talk going on. And I said, "Yeah, sure, I'll do it. What the heck?" This dude was an Army Ranger. He's a life flight medic. I figure if anybody here in this room is qualified to stick a tube up my nose, it's this guy. And so I thought, yeah, sure, why not, right? So he looked at me like, "Yeah, really, sure?" And I said, "Yeah, man." And he lubed that thing up. And he said, "This is going to taste a little weird." And that's what I thought was, okay, well, the taste, I can handle the taste. My eyes watered like I was watching Old Yeller. That was just a funky experience, really funky experience. But
that's funny.
Yeah, and then the funny thing was when we got into the chest needle decompressions, he asked the same question. "Okay, who wants to volunteer?" And I'm like, nope, I'm out. Right? And he was completely joking about that one. But we also did the sucking chest wounds, like an occlusive dressing or chest seal, tension pneumothorax with the needle decompression. And then we also covered junctional hemorrhages. And that's the interesting one. So dealing with femoral bleeds, in the junction of the leg and the groin, is fascinating to see what you do with that. And there's not many options really.
No. Did they go over junctional tourniquets at all with you?
We did.
Were they just doing wound packing with that?
No, we did junctional tourniquets. Yeah. And wound packing both. I learned why you carry a plank of wood in your backpack if you can, right? Or your medical jump bag. You hope that the guy's wearing a belt or you've got something to cinch that thing down on his waist while you're using that plank. But we also did the junctional injuries in the arm, like the armpit area or the neck, and using bandages and the leverage of the person's neck or arm to apply just a ridiculous amount of force to that to compress, right? So it was interesting. It was really interesting. I nearly passed out from the guy that wrapped my, the Israeli bandage around my neck and around my armpit. And then, of course, you put your arm down and it puts all that pressure against the side of your neck. And, and I thought, we did it a little bit too tight. And then the EMT that was doing the thing, or the flight nurse that was doing the thing, looked at me and said, you need to loosen that up. You're starting to go white. So, he could tell I was about to go. And I thought, yeah, man, I'm feeling a little lightheaded. But, it was effective. It could apply a lot of pressure there. So anyway.
That's probably a good segue because I'm sure some of our listeners are like, what is junctional? What,
right.
Hemorrhage, some of these people may not know.
All these inside jokes and terms, right?
Terms and needle decompression and all that.
Yep.
So, we talked about CPR AED. We talked about, your basic first aid. I think the next step is basic bleeding control, even before you get into some of that other stuff you were talking about,
right.
Chest seals and needle decompressions and NPAs and airways and all that stuff. Bleeding control, bleeding is what's going to kill you the fastest.
Right.
If you look at TCCC, like I was talking about earlier, Tactical Combat Casualty Care, what that basically is, for the listeners that don't know, is that is basically the military's standard for care under fire. So we're engaging an enemy, people are injured. How are we going to treat people? What are we going to treat? What are we going to delay in treating?
Right.
How quickly are we going to treat these different things? And the number one thing they treat is massive hemorrhaging.
Right.
Because that's the most important thing. That's what's going to kill you the fastest. Back to what I was saying earlier, when you were saying, 3 minutes, you're going to bleed out.
Yeah.
And that is dying. You might have 30 seconds from a femoral bleed before you're incapacitated. So if you don't get a tourniquet on yourself and you're by yourself, say in one of these incidents, or it's a lawnmower accident out in the backyard, and your family's gone or whatever, you might have 30 seconds to get that tourniquet on you.
Right.
Which kind of goes into, well, if my first aid kit is in the house and I am chopping firewood in the backyard and nick my leg, I might not even be able to run into the house and get my tourniquet. So I'm a big proponent, and I'm sure we'll talk about it more. I'm a big proponent of having medical as a part of your EDC,
right?
No matter who you are, no matter where you are, because there's far more things that can happen outside of just an active shooter incident, to where you can definitely experience some type of severe bleeding.
Right. Yeah. No. One of the things that our instructor was very quick to point out to us as kind of a preface was that in a situation like that, medical intervention usually can't make the situation worse and probably can just make it better. And that's sort of a foundational tenet of the military's combat casualty care, is that it's something, it's basic, it's easy to understand, it's it's available to you to do these procedures in a limited amount of time in austere conditions, meaning that you don't have a surgical suite or an ambulance stocked right next to you, but this is stuff that you can do right away that can make a big difference. I'm looking again at some of the notes that we had from the class, and it was like 65% of the people who die from a penetrating trauma, be that a bullet or a piece of rebar goes through a person on a construction site, or a component of a car goes through them in a car accident, things like that. 65% of the people who die as a result of those injuries, they do so within about 5 minutes, right? So the time is so short. But this trauma EMS medical skill set that we're talking about, it addresses the remaining 35% or more who are still alive after the 5 minute mark. And so we're talking about the stuff that over the course of the next half hour, it prevents treatable causes of death. And, it is the difference between nicking your leg with an axe chopping wood and never making it to the house to get a tourniquet, or that's why, like you said, you want that on your person to deal with. So
yeah, and when we're talking about bleeding control for the listeners, I think it's important for them to know really, your two main skills that you're going to learn. Well, three main skills are tourniquets, wound packing, and pressure dressings. And all three of those you can teach a child how to do.
Yeah.
They're not difficult. Quite frankly, I think they're easier than CPR. If anybody has ever given somebody CPR, I don't care how good of shape you're in, after doing it for even just a minute, 60 seconds, a minute and a half, 90 seconds, like, you are smoked.
Right. Yeah.
A lot of people don't know me, but they know my daughter, because I had a viral video of me throwing a tourniquet at my daughter probably about a year and a half ago. Went out and got like 20 million views all over the internet. But she was 11 at the time, and she knows how to use a tourniquet, and she did it just fine. It's, people think, oh, you've got to be a medical professional to learn this stuff. A lot of this stuff is so easy, your child can learn how to do it.
Yeah, absolutely it is. I've seen the video. It's pretty amazing. I've shown that video to other people. When, after coming out of that class, it's like any other class. You get a little amped up and you want to tell the whole world about it. And, I was telling some folks at work about the tourniquet stuff and how easy it is to use, especially with modern tourniquets. And, I reach for my phone almost every single time, find the video and show them, here's a guy I know tossing a tourniquet to his daughter and saying, daddy's bleeding, the clock's ticking, go. And, watch her go to work. And it's fascinating. And the modern tourniquets, there's some mechanical advantages to them that you don't have to be, Charles Atlas or Dwayne Johnson, bulging muscles and have to pull with extreme force. No, you cinch it tight, and then you start twisting the little windlass handle, and it does all the work to tighten it down. And man, it can tighten down tight. So and you might have a kid that maybe isn't super strong, or they're kind of young, and they may not be able to tighten that windlass just tight enough to completely stop that massive hemorrhaging. But if they're tightening it down at least somewhat, it's going to slow it down at least a little bit, and that might just be the little bit that you need. Yeah. And we often, we overlook our kids with some of this training, and man, I got slammed by a lot of people for that video. It was kind of funny. You got your internet trolls and whatnot, but a lot of people why would you expose your daughter to that? That's not
terrible.
On the
Why
internet.
that? Yeah, no, not on the internet. Of course not. But people were like, why would you? She needs to be innocent. She needs to remain innocent.
Sure.
She doesn't need to know any of that. And I'm like, well, I'd rather not have the first time she learns about massive hemorrhaging be when her daddy's laying on the ground bleeding out.
Dying in front of her.
That's the world we live in now.
Right. That's exactly right. Yeah. I mean, and that's assuming a bad actor. That's assuming that, somebody bursts in and injures you in front of her and exposes her to violence. Again, these kinds of things can happen in a car wreck. They can happen in a camping accident or anything, splitting firewood, working on a car, you name it. A car falls off of a jack stand while you've got a wheel off. It's entirely possible for, the brake rotor or the frame of the car to cause a crushing injury that also opens a wound, an arterial wound. And, my God, it's life happens, accidents happen, and it's just good to know how to deal with those kinds of things. So, I'm with you. So, maybe a good spot to talk about some of the equipment. We've talked about the classes and things. I think, one other footnote I want to add about a class is that a good class, and perhaps we can talk a little bit more as we wrap up about how to find or identify a good class. But I think one characteristic of a good class also is going to help you plan and sort out your first aid kit. And, I think if you spend $200 or so for a trauma class and they don't do that, you might raise your hand and ask for a refund, because that should be a basic part of it.
Yeah. And the thing is too, I don't want to segue too much, but a lot of these companies, they're putting filler items in it's a trauma kit and it's got a burn dressing in it.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm not going to save anybody's life with a burn dressing.
Right.
I would much rather have compressed gauze or an extra pressure bandage or an extra tourniquet or something that's going to actually save somebody's life. I don't need, especially if I'm talking about EDC, when real estate, when space is of the utmost importance, I don't want junk in there that I don't need.
Right.
And a lot of us, a lot of people don't have training, so they just go out and buy a kit and think they're prepared, when really half of it's junk and it's not going to really save anybody's life. I don't need Benadryl in an active shooter. Like, that's great that you've got 30 capsules of Benadryl in your pocket, but that's not going to do anybody any good.
Right. Now I'm with you completely. Maybe a good point to just mention that as we're talking through this, I know that if I'm listening to a podcast or a radio show or anything like that, and I'm starting to become intrigued by what they're talking about, I'm probably already on the internet looking at med kits. So right now, we have people that we know and trust. Odin Medical, that's Odin Medical's website. Click over to that. Look at what they've got. They've got no frills med kits that have the essentials in there. And it's stuff that guys who are, these are door kickers and global war on terror veterans and police officers and medics and stuff that are actually putting this stuff together. And they're telling you, hey, look, this is the no fluff, no BS stuff that really you need, and none of the junk that you don't. You're not going to find a lollipop, 2 Band-Aids, and a tongue depressor in their kits because they just know that's not essential. Hey folks, David here. Did you know that there is more to the Shooters Nation than this podcast? Mark and I are working hard to knit together a community of well-informed, responsibly armed citizens who are well prepared to face the worst days of their lives. We would like to invite you to join us and the other listeners on our various social media outlets and become an active part of the Shooters Nation community. You can find us on Instagram as @ShootersNationRadio. And if Facebook is your thing, you can find us there at facebook.com/ShootersNation. While you're there, be sure to click on the link to join our Facebook Shooters Nation community. And as always, you can head over to shootersnation.com for more listener resources. Hey, look, this is the no fluff, no BS stuff that really you need, and none of the junk that you don't. You're not going to find a lollipop, 2 Band-Aids, and a tongue depressor in their kits because they just know that's not essential.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll talk about it more later, but that's important too, is to make sure don't go get these kits on Amazon or eBay, because there's a lot of fakes out there, tourniquets and fraudulent tourniquets and Chinese knockoffs. And the last thing you want to do is slap what you think is a cat tourniquet on your leg, and then it breaks because you thought, I'll save $10. This was only $20 instead of $30.
Yep.
So make sure, and we'll talk about some more where to get it, but make sure you're getting it from actual good, solid sources and dealers.
Yep, absolutely. And I guess while I'm on the Odin Medical thing, those guys put a podcast out of their own called The Med Shed. You ought to, when you get done listening to this, if we've kind of whet your appetite, I cannot recommend that one strongly enough. Some of the episodes are really geared towards guys that are in the emergency medical or in the law enforcement military arenas. There's still solid information there that you can learn from, but they do episodes that are intended to educate you and open your eyes to what sorts of techniques you should learn. Unlike us, they are medical professionals who can teach this stuff, and they do teach classes. So anyway, definitely hit that after the show and get wiser. Equipment wise. So I'll throw out the bunny stuff real quick. Cpr Face Shield. Those things are cheap, pennies on the dollar. Yep. You can find those. And you can get them for your key ring. They have little tiny ones that'll go on your keys. Yep, I bought a 10-pack of those. Now I did buy those on Amazon because there's not a whole lot in that, right? That's not going to fail you generally. 10-pack of those little key ring things, I think it was under $10, and I gave them to everybody in my family, right? And so pretty handy. Nitrile rubber gloves, cheap pennies. You could buy a box of those things for under $20, or you can spend the really spend big bucks on the bear claw type. They're super grippy and such, but good nitrile rubber gloves, you can get those things for $20 for a pack of 100. And just
I will throw something out about that, and we all make this mistake, but don't get black. I know it's tactical or whatever, but when you're doing a blood sweep of somebody, it's much harder to see blood on black gloves.
Absolutely.
So you want to get, like the tan bear claw gloves or the purple or something, or especially if it's at night, you're not going to be able to see. So make sure I've got a bunch of black gloves here that I've wasted money on in the past, but don't make that mistake.
No, you're very right. I've got some black gloves I use in the garage for cleaning parts in the cars, and if I'm cooking or something like that, and I won't get my hands dirty. But I've got the purple gloves for med use. And a quick tip for folks, take a business card, roll it across the length of it, tape it together so that you've created a cylinder, cram your couple pair of gloves up in that, and now you've got a neat little thing that you can keep in your med kit. And you don't have to go fishing around for your gloves. It's just a nice little cylinder packed full of gloves. It's cheap, easy, quick to do. So beyond that, tourniquets, Jason, I think we've talked about tourniquets before with a couple of other guests. What's your preference as far as tourniquet brand or design?
So I'm a big believer of only getting one of the two TCCC approved tourniquets. So either the CAT from North American Rescue, their latest generation is the Gen 7. Mm-hmm. It's the best one. You only have to thread it through one of the buckles, not two like the old ones. Yeah. And the windlass is a lot more beefier. They had some issues with the windlass breaking. Or from TacMed Solutions, you can get the Softy wide. I personally, and once again, disclaimer, I'm not a medical professional, but putting tourniquets on hundreds, if not thousands of times in training, I find that the CAT is easier for self-aid if I only have one arm. So let's say I had, a arterial bleed in one of my arms and I could only apply it with the other arm. I find the CAT is much easier to apply injured, simulated injured.
Yeah, one-handed.
And I actually like the Softy wide for buddy aid. And you'll find a lot of people that are like that. But it's also personal preference. You can obviously use the CAT for buddy aid, and you can also use the Softy wide for buddy aid. But the buckle on the Softy wide is a little more difficult and takes a little more training to manipulate one-handed.
Absolutely.
But now's probably a good time just to also tell people always buy at least two tourniquets. You want one for training. You can write with a Sharpie on it at training. Some of them come in, blue, which is usually the universal color for training or whatever. You don't want to train with your carried tourniquet. All that stuff breaks down, the fibers, the threads, all that stuff, the Velcro, all that stuff can break down. And if you keep twisting that and Velcroing it and doing all that stuff, it can break down and possibly fail. They're one-time use. They're not meant for reuse. So make sure you at least get two. And I have a bunch of training tourniquets, and I usually incorporate that into my range time, or even when I'm working out or doing stuff, just do 4 tourniquet drills, do it on each limb, just spend 5 minutes doing it a day, and you'll be amazed how proficient you can become very quickly just by training a little bit.
That's a good reminder for me. I don't train with them that often. Normally I've got one, like you said, I've got one that's smart for training. And it's a CAT 7, so or CAT Gen 7. I use that for training, and my preference is CAT tourniquets as well. I do have a few Softy tourniquets. I've got 2 Softies in each of my vehicle bags, but if I'm carrying one on my person, it's gonna be a CAT 7 generally. I do know what you mean about the Softy being easier for buddy medicine. That the little hook mechanism that allows you to hook the pieces together. That's very quick with 2 hands, and it's not like you have to with the CAT 7. You either take it apart to quickly wrap it around a limb and then reinsert it through the buckle, or you just open it up the loop really wide and hope that you can get it up the leg or down up the arm or whatever. So not as quick for buddy medicine. I'm on the same page with you. I think the one thing that I do like more about the Softy is the metal windlass. Not that I haven't had the injection molded nylon windlass break on the CAT 7, but the metal windlass, just mentally, I think I'm more comfortable that it won't. Again, I've not had any experiences to the contrary, but So what about the rats tourniquet, right? Because I kind of fell into that early on and thought, even though I knew the Cat 7 and the Softy were superior and that they were TCCC certified, the rats tourniquet was kind of mentioned as well. Here's something small and lightweight, portable, low profile that you can stuff down in a pocket. It's better for children. It's better for dogs, that kind of stuff. Since then, my thinking has evolved, and I think I could address either of those 2 points with a Cat 7 or a Softy. But what do you think about the rats?
So I always try to be careful and polite, but I'm not a fan of it, and I won't carry it.
Right.
I also want to be careful because I'm not a medical professional, but what I will say is every single medical professional that I have talked to face to face about the rats or some of these other tourniquets that are kind of bungee or elastic or thinner, the argument is always exactly what you said for infants and for dogs. So let's talk about canines for a second. Most canines don't have at least stateside here, most canines don't have massive hemorrhaging from their limbs.
Right.
Because if you just look at the anatomy of a dog, it's all torso.
Right.
Dogs, their limbs are not a high percentage.
And you can't use a tourniquet on a torso. So it's
exactly.
It's for limb use, right?
So the odds of me, Joe Blow citizen, having a massive hemorrhage, and I'm a dog lover, so I've got 4 dogs. I used to be a search and rescue canine handler. I'm all in on the dog game and saving my dogs.
Right.
But the odds of me needing to tourniquet one of my dog's limbs is astronomically low.
Right.
The second argument is, what about infants? What about pediatrics? What about people with really, really, really small limbs? Every legitimate medic that I've spoken to will tell you that a well-placed, tight pressure dressing can typically stop massive hemorrhaging from a limb on an infant,
right.
or small person or whatever.
Right.
I won't get into too much of why I'm not a fan of the rats, but I'm not personally a fan of it.
Yeah, I think same. It's tricky. The rats design, and it relies on you overlapping the winding as you go around the limb with the tourniquet in order to get the width that you need to properly.
And you have to stretch it.
Right, to properly
try doing that one-handed.
Right, exactly. And so I've got 2 of them. They're nowhere in my carry anymore. They're just there as an example. If I wanted to show somebody, the instructor that we had for the PHTLS class said, "Hey, look, for pediatrics, here's a thing, right? If you truly know by a quick visual assessment that your tourniquet is not going to cinch down tight enough, grab a roll of gauze, wrap the limb quickly in the gauze to add to the overall diameter of the limb, throw the tourniquet on top of it, crank it down. That will work together to do what you need to do. And again, we're not in the business on this show of telling people how to do things to save your life, right? So that, again, informational only. Go get real training. This is a guy on a podcast teaching you a thing, and this is nowhere in my wheelhouse. But there are options, I think, other than the rats.
Yeah,
and get your hands on the stat tourniquet yet?
Yeah, we've been talking about those. There's a lot of different new ones that I've been talking to the Odin guys about, and the Odin medical guys are so far above and beyond my knowledge, and they're still both, all of them are still Cat or Softy wide, and they don't. There's I do believe that there's going to be some new things coming out and some new studies on some of these other tourniquets and stuff that will shed some light on some of them. And there are possibly going to be some other options or whatever, but we're just kind of waiting for some of those studies to come out. But for me, personally, we have 2 tourniquets that are approved and have literally hundreds, if not thousands, of saves under their belt. They're combat proven, so it's the argument for a lot of this other stuff is, well, carrying this other tourniquet is better than nothing. Well,
Right.
so is a high point, but I'm not going to carry a high point every day. It's better than nothing.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I get that argument. Like if that's all you're going to carry, but
Right.
I mean, if you don't wear skinny jeans, you can fit a cat or a soft T wide in your front pocket.
Right.
And I know we have, you know, smartphones that are the size of, you know, iPads now, and keys and knives and wallets and flashlights and spare mags and all this stuff. But I mean, you can, I do it all the time. I throw a cat in one of my front pockets.
Yeah. What about, while we're on the subject of tourniquets, where do you come in on ankle carry for a tourniquet? Like, you know, obviously you're having to wear long pants for that, right? That's not something you're going to wear with shorts, and you're holding one up on the camera. That's awesome.
I'm glad you brought that up. So I carry basically a mini IFAC on me every day in one of two ways. I work from home, so I don't have to worry about dress clothes too much, which is nice. So I'm usually wearing here in Florida cargo shorts.
Yep.
So I literally have an IFAC that I've made myself. It's literally in a Ziploc sandwich bag that is literally like a complete blowout kit that I can treat pretty much, you know, any of your basic level trauma. But I do like ankle carry for when I'm in jeans or dress pants, you know, or, you know, some type of business attire or whatever. When I was photographing weddings, I would always use my ankle first aid kit because they obviously didn't have cargo pockets or whatever. But in my ankle med kit right now, so I have the Softy wide in it because it actually packs a lot smaller than the cat. It's a little bit better for EDC.
Yeah.
But I've got that. I have a pressure dressing. I have quick clot combat gauze. I have trauma shears. I have a needle decompression. I have 2 halo chest seals and gloves.
Wow. I saw the shears, the handle of the shears poking up above that. And I realized that you were serious about it when I saw that. You know, what's funny is are shears like absolutely necessary? No. But I actually used these shears 2 months ago with Rich Graham at a course. One of the SWAT guys we were teaching shredded his ankle really bad. Wow.
People have seen that video on there, but he snapped his tib fib and dislocated his ankle, and I used the shears to cut his shoe off right away before his foot swelled up. So it's not life-saving, nothing sexy or whatever, but like having the shears was helpful.
I threw up a little bit in my mouth when you brought up that video because I have seen it. And
it's brutal.
Yeah.
It's brutal.
I think, Mark, you were the one that sprung that video on me kind of unbeknownst. It's like, hey, watch this. And we all watched it. And I was like, yeah. Yeah, it's kind of gross. Yeah, that poor guy. So how's he doing? You know, is he back?
He's great, man.
Okay.
He was, you know, they're in Mississippi, man. That guy was hilarious, man. He snapped it, and he's like, somebody get me my Copenhagen, man. He just threw a dip in, and he's like, all right, let's get the ambulance here.
Rub some dirt in it, right?
Yeah, but
awesome.
he was actually the SWAT commander. He was really cool about it, you know, and tough guy, and it's just a freak incident or whatever. But no, it was he's doing well. He had surgery. He's obviously out for a while, but I'll be actually up there with Rich in a few weeks in December, helping train them again. So I'll see him in a few weeks.
Yeah, no competitive hopscotch for him for a few more months. So that was pretty ugly. All right. So we've talked about tourniquets. We've mentioned chest seals a couple of times. Don't know. We don't have to spend a whole heck of a lot of time there because there's probably not a lot to talk about. But for me, I've been using the hyphen vent, the entry exit kit. So it's got 2 seals in it. What about you? I guess if somebody's looking for quality gear in that space, you mentioned the halos. So
I have the halos are bigger, which is nice. So like if you have a couple holes that are close together, you might be able to cover both of them or whatever. But I have a bunch of the hyphens as well. There's a lot of different brands out there, and the thing is you go talk to 10 different medics, they're going to give you 10 different preferences. So like as long as it's something that's solid and legit,
right?
That's do it.
Yeah, the Odin guys are very much in that camp. You know, you hear them on the podcast and they talk about several different options. And I think they each have had their own preferences, and they mention that kind of thing, right? It's sometimes it's also about the vent that's in it, you know, which way it drains and that sort of thing. Again, not in the business of telling people how to do medicine, but a chest seal in a package like that is nice, but our instructor was pretty quick to show you that you can improvise some of this stuff. And chest seal is just to keep air from going into the thoracic cavity where your lungs are. So it's just a sandwich bag and some duct tape on 3 sides will do essentially what a chest seal will.
Yeah, and a really interesting point on chest seals. We're starting to get a lot of data now on these different active shooter incidents as far as wound patterning. And with the patterns of wound, for the Vegas shooting, so there was, I believe, 58 victims, I think? Somewhere
yeah, I
close
think that
to
was
60
right.
victims.
Yeah.
One of them, if you look at the autopsy reports, and I'll throw out a disclaimer, not trying to trample on the graves of anybody, and I always think that we can learn things from these incidents or whatever.
Sure,
so I'm not trying
absolutely.
to bring up anything morbid, and definitely don't want to disrespect those victims or their families or whatever. But only one of the victims, of the 58 victims, died of extremity hemorrhage.
Oh, wow.
And it was over 30. I want to say 35 or 36. Don't quote me on that. But over 30 of the victims died from gunshot wounds to the chest or back.
Yeah.
So to the torso. So as much as we stress bleeding control, and bleeding control is extremely important, if I was building an active shooter kit, I would have a crap load of chest seals.
Right. Okay. Good to know.
And I'm not saying that a chest seal would have saved all those victims, because obviously some of them, were shot, in vital organs or shot
Right.
through the heart or whatever, that, a trauma surgeon wouldn't have even been able to save them or whatever.
Correct.
But you're in a active shooter incident, and you're seeing this, with the Parkland shooting, Vegas, all these different incidents, that a lot of these people are not being shot in the limbs, and they're not dying from extremity hemorrhage. They're actually dying from their torso wounds.
Right.
So having chest seals is really, really important, and it's often overlooked because we've now started getting medical out there, but now we're focusing just on tourniquets, just
Yep.
on bleeding control. And that's vital, that's important, but chest seals are also pretty darn important.
Yeah.
It makes me think about that instance when we were talking with Rich about like when the shooter's in an elevated position, it doesn't make as much sense to lay down as it does to, crunch or kneel or something like that. And I remember, you see the pictures in the cell phone video and stuff, and like the parking lot's flat because everybody is laying exactly down.
Yep.
And what floor was this guy on? It was a ridiculously elevated position.
Very
so they're
elevated.
making themselves bigger targets.
Right.
Yep.
That's just bonkers.
Yeah, no, I mean, you're exactly right. And so I'll reiterate what you said, Jason. I think a way that we can honor the dead is by learning from, their unfortunate circumstance. And, it's fascinating to hear that most of those injuries were chest, thorax type injuries. And so maybe it's key to mention to somebody that doesn't understand this, tourniquet, you're going to use those on limbs, extremities, legs, arms. You can't tourniquet a neck. You can't tourniquet a torso. When you start dealing with torso injuries, you're talking about, sucking chest wounds, punctured lungs. If it's a punctured heart, that's a problem that you're not going to deal with on the school ground or on the, the concert ground. That's a problem that a surgeon's going to have to deal with, and you hope that person can make it to surgical care. But, the occlusive dressing and chest seals and things like that just, you're trying to stop air from flowing into a space where air shouldn't be, and why that's important in a puncture in the torso. The lungs are tissue thin, and they don't, they work because of your diaphragm, and because you have an open air space inside your body cavity where they can inflate and deflate. That's how breathing, respiration works, right? So the purpose of the chest seal is to keep the air outside from infiltrating that space and causing the lung to not be able to function, right? So what if these people are dying from chest injuries that weren't hitting major arteries or the heart or something like that? They're essentially suffocating to death, which is terrible. And it's easy to solve that with chest dressing, a chest seal, on the front and the back?
I mean, it's probably, when we're talking about preventable causes of death, I mean, a chest seal is literally probably the easiest medical intervention you could learn. If you've ever peeled the back off of a sticker and put it in a sticker book, like you can do a chest seal or whatever. And, we need to address, you can also then have issues with tension pneumothorax and have to, do a needle decompression or burp the chest seal. I'm not going to get into the how-tos of all that or whatever. But the reality is most likely that is not going to, unless you're, somewhere rural. If you're in an urban area, tension pneumothorax is probably not going to develop prior to a higher level of care arriving on scene.
Right.
So you just want to seal that, torso and hopefully, somebody's going to be there in time. Now, like I've said earlier, I'm trained in needle decompression. I'm not technically that's outside of my scope of practice. So I'm not going to do that, on a car accident victim, but I'm certainly going to, drop one on my wife if I have to.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I think the really, and correct me if I'm wrong, and I'm going back in my head on this one, going back in my brain to try to recall the memory. Tension pneumothorax is going to arise when the lung itself has been pierced and oxygen, air is getting into the thoracic cavity from the lung. So you've put the occlusive dressing, the chest seal on the outside, something's punctured all the way through, and it's got the lung as well. So, you occlude the external wound to keep air from coming in, and then the needle decompression is actually to open that up and allow some of the air to escape out as they breathe, right? Because the lung has also been punctured. So. And sometimes that can even come from a broken rib, right? They might not have an external injury, it might be a broken rib that's punctured a lung, and now they're doing that same gasping for breath kind of thing, and that's where a chest decompression would come in. Not trying to, I'm not going to tell you how to do it on this show. Can't describe it to you, right? But that's why, and these are some of the things that you're going to learn in these training classes, and they're going to tell you how to identify what the cause of the issue is. A person that's gasping for breath doesn't have an external injury. That's a certain thing, and you address that a certain way. A person with an external injury in the chest that's gasping for breath, that's a different thing potentially, or it's a combination of things, and you deal with that a certain way. So I'll say that in the training that I had, the needle decompression, that was probably the scariest, freakiest thing that we learned to do in that one class. And you're taking a needle and you're shoving it into a person's chest at a certain spot, or one of several certain spots. And that seems like I shouldn't be doing this, right? You shouldn't be stabbing a hole in a person's chest. But man, it was really neat on the dummy to see how it suddenly made a difference. All the difference in the world. So chest seals, about $15, folks. You can get those things, from Odin Medical, Dark Angel, any number of, reputable vendors. If you're going to do Amazon, do your research, look to make sure that the feedback on the seller is strong positive. They're sending the legit stuff, not airsoft grade garbage your way. But hearing what you said, Jason, I'm going to start stocking up on more chest seals. I've got 4. I take that back. I've got 5 in each bag. So I kind of took the N+1 approach. There's 4 of us in my family. So I got 4 plus 1 as a fail-safe, right? And I'll offer my approach on putting together a first aid kit is predominantly for me and my family. If I've got enough gear in there to help other people, fantastic. But, from what I've heard, most police officers, the tourniquet they carry, that's for them, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And when you go through TCCC or TECC and stuff, they teach you that, if I roll up and David, you're the officer down, I'm taking the tourniquet off of your vest or your belt and putting it on you. That's your tourniquet. I'm not taking the one that I might need for myself off of me. Right.
Yep. Okay. So, we've talked about the NPA, the nasopharyngeal airway tube. That's another one that I really don't want to be prescriptive in any way on how you would do it.
That's going to be outside of most people's scope of practice as well.
Yeah.
It's considered invasive.
It is. Yeah. Anytime you're putting something into a person like a needle decompression It's a nasal breathing tube, and there's certain reasons why you would use that. Good training will explain it. Those, the NPA tube generally comes with a little packet of lube, and that's about $10. Folks, you can buy all this stuff on the internet from reputable places, but buying it and keeping it in your inventory doesn't mean that you should use it. Doesn't mean that you've been trained to use it, right? So the training is the most important part. These things, the seals and the tourniquets and the NPA tubes and the needle decompression stuff, I'm going to call those consumable. Those are like bullets for your gun, right? You've got to learn how to use the gun and use it responsibly to be effective with it. The bullets are consumable. Same way with the medical supplies. So don't go buy a bunch of medical supplies and feel like, hey, I can deal with this. If you don't have the training, you really don't. And I'm telling you that from a very humble perspective of I didn't know what I didn't know until I took the training. And it was eye-opening.
Yeah, I want to touch on something because you made me think of something that was a good point you brought up. But absolutely, 100%, you need to get the training. Don't go buy a first aid kit just like you don't buy a gun and just hope you're going to magically know how to put bullets where they go if you've never had any training. But one thing people ask me a lot or I hear is like, okay, I went and I took my bleeding control course. I learned how to use a tourniquet. I learned how to pack a wound, and I learned how to put on a pressure dress. I bought this high-speed first aid kit, and it's got a decompression needle in it. Yeah. I should take that outright and not carry it. I'm going to throw a little monkey wrench in and say I'm not opposed to people carrying that, A, if they have no intention of using it, and B, it's strictly for you never know who's on scene.
Right.
There might be a doctor next to you. I mean, there's a lot of off-duty medics and people that have all sorts of, nurses, doctors, medics, all kinds of stuff, but don't carry stuff with them. You never know who might be right next to you, and somebody, might have that skill set, and you don't want to be like, oh, crap, I didn't carry this just because I didn't know how to do it. Now, I'm not saying go buy an entire first aid kit, never get any training, and hope that somebody else is on scene that knows how to use a tourniquet or knows how to pack a wound or knows how to use a chest seal. But that's just something I like to throw out there for people to think about. Point. Like, don't not carry it because you're like, oh, I don't know how to use it.
Right. No, that's a good point. You're at the ball field and then somebody's injured and, you're sitting there and you whip open your kit and somebody else runs over and says, hey, I'm a doctor, I'm a medic, I'm a nurse, whatever. And they're going, oh, man, if I only had, and hey, wait, I've actually got that. It's like, holy cow, you got that? I can save this guy. Get it out, get it over here right now. Right. So I want to come back to that in a second because I think that, I want to ask you about medical kits for on-person carry, vehicle carry, that kind of stuff. But we'll get there. We've talked about the chest needle, decompression needle. I'll throw that out, about $16. That is, go ahead, buy it, put it in your kit, get the training to use it. Don't go using it if you don't know how to. But to Jason's point, if you've got it on you, the person rendering care to you or the guy next to you might know how to use that thing. And now, that environment's a little less austere. They've actually got something to do some work with.
And you want to check your laws too. You touched on this earlier, some of the legal stuff you talked about a little while ago. Some of these classes will teach you, but definitely check your specific state. But a lot of states have what's called a Good Samaritan law, that as long as you're acting in good faith and you're not doing something that is outside of your scope of practice, you're not going to be held liable for your medical intervention.
Right.
Now, if you try to go do a surgical crike and cut open somebody's throat and stick a pen in it because you saw it on an episode of, ER one time. Oh, wow, I just dated myself saying ER. That's not going to go very well for you. But if you're doing something that, hey, I learned how to pack a wound, and hey, this guy had, junctional bleed in his groin, and I, packed his groin or whatever, and hey, he, ended up dying or a complication happened or something, if your state has a Good Samaritan law, you're not going to be held liable. Right. But I'm not going to give any legal advice on that. Go check your specific state laws on that.
Right. Yeah. And I'll mention quickly, you brought up wound packing. Not in the business of training people. Don't know how many times I can say that, but another, thou shalt not, torso, chest injuries, things like that, thoracic injuries. You don't cram gauze packing into those generally. That is that airspace in around the heart and the lungs that is open for a reason. We don't shove gauze into that. So
yep.
Yeah, that's where chest seals come in. Gauze is great for extremity wounds, junctional wounds, etc., but not head wounds, unless you can see brain. And I've always, our thing was, if you can see brain, man, that's a bad day for that person. You keep them comfortable and dial 911, right? So,
yeah.
Jason, what's the best way to vet trainers that you may potentially be wanting to train with or getting some training from?
So, that's a good question. And the Odin medical guys are always harping on that, because it's no different than the firearm community. You get all these people that will go out and get random certifications or whatever. And now they have these letters or certifications behind their name. And people think, oh, this person knows what, they're talking about. I can go out and I can go get like TCCC instructor certified or TECC instructor certified. Like, I could literally go do that. I would never do that because I'm not a professional in that. But there's people out there that just go take a certification course. So what I always suggest, and unfortunately you have to hope that somebody's not lying about their background, but go dig into somebody's background. There's a lot of people out there that are teaching like care under fire, and they've never been a combat medic or a SWAT medic, and they've never rendered aid under fire. Like, that to me is just baffling or whatever. But you want to go, if you're getting medical training, you want to get somebody that's legitimately a medical professional. And a lot of times guys that have been like flight medics, or worked in the trauma bay, in the ER, guys that have seen actual trauma. Combat medics are great, and like a lot of the Odin medical guys are combat medics, but combat medicine and civilian medicine are very, very, very different.
Very different.
And a very simple distinction is most combat medics, if they're working on their, fellow soldiers, they're 18 to 30 years old in relatively very good shape. They don't have extra medical conditions. They don't have, they're not running around with diabetes. They're not on blood thinners, all that. Civilian medicine, those medics show up on scene and they have no idea what that person's taking, what they're on, so it's very different or whatever. And I don't want to get off on a rabbit trail on that, but just the number one thing I can say is just try to dig into your instructor's background. And then, you can always email a handful of people and be like, hey, have you heard of the guys at such and such company or XYZ company, and see what type of reputation they have in the industry. But, background's the big thing.
I think a good instructor should be willing to divulge, their bona fides. They should be willing to divulge, references. They should be people that you should, you can feel free to email these folks, call them, whatever, previous students, agencies that they've worked for, et cetera. And if there's any shadiness in that, and they seem to be, reluctant to get that information out to you, go elsewhere.
And experience is relative too. Like the TECC course I was just at the past couple of days, there was some medic team was there, and they're up in North Florida, close to Georgia, and they are extremely rural. And rural medics often get a bad rap because they're not working calls constantly. But what these medics have to do is they have a 50 to 55 minute drive to the hospital. So they might not be humping calls all day, every day, but they actually have to keep their patient alive for more than 5 minutes. So you might work, in the heart of New York, but you have advanced care 3 minutes in any direction, hospitals everywhere and trauma surgeons close by. So you might have a lot of experience, working a lot of calls, but you've never had to keep somebody alive for more than 5 minutes.
Right.
And I'm not trying to say any of those medics are better or worse than anybody else. Like I said, I'm not a medic professional, so I'm not trying to dig into there, but just something for the listeners to, think about is, experience. It also depends on what kind of experience. Too.
Right. Yeah.
So when you're talking about different people teaching this sort of things, with the firearms industry and many different types of things, there are different methods and different ways to kind of go about doing the same thing, whether it's a high ready or a low ready, or like the Rob Pincus versus the Steve Fisher, mindset of right. No, with medical, it's not like that though, right? I mean, there's kind of right and there's wrong, and there's the way to do it, and then
so like, let's take tourniquets, for example. So you might run into people saying, I like staging a tourniquet this way, or I like applying it like in this direction, or this is the way I like putting it on somebody. Like, you might have some nuances there between instructors. Bottom line is the tourniquet has to go above the wound. Like you can't argue like, no, it can go below the wound. Like, no, you're not going to stop the bleed. Like it's not about a technique. It's about science at that point. Because there's people I know that have horrible technique with firearms, and they hit the target every time. So like, whatever, I don't care that your grip sucks. You're a really good shooter, even though your grip sucks. Like, oh well, like, it's not like that, with medicine. There are things you have to do and things you can do and shouldn't do, and that doesn't really change.
Right.
Yeah, I think, really that's it. It all boils down to the science, and that's irrefutable. And a good trainer is going to base their curriculum in the science, and they're going to be able to articulate the why. Here's the how, here's the what. They should be able to articulate the why, and the why should be rooted in science. So I'm also trying to think another thing is if they're operating under an umbrella organization like the NAEMT or something like that, they have a protocol that's very prescriptive of this is what you teach. Here's how you teach it. And so there's a little bit of governance there. Unfortunately, there's not that necessarily in the firearms industry, which is why you end up with weirdos, putting photographers downrange next to the target and stuff like that. Not gonna name names, but silly shenanigans like that.
And just to touch on that real quick, David, sorry to interrupt you. But I've been to different TECC courses now and seen, the medicine is the same. Doesn't matter who the instructor is. I've been to some of these different medical courses, like I've seen how Odin Medical does it. I've seen how D-Day Response Group does it. And I've seen how First Response Group in Orlando does it. And all those guys are teaching the same exact curriculum and the same exact medicine, and it's all standardized. The thing that's different is the scenarios and how they do it. Like the D-Day guys are down in South Florida. Their stuff was modeled very much off of the Parkland shooting stuff. When I went through TECC in Orlando, our scenarios were very much based off of the Pulse nightclub shooting. The Odin guys are bringing their combat medicine experience, their flight medicine experience into their different scenarios. So you're going to have different, insights and different tweaks and stuff. But as far as the general concept, particularly the medicine, that's going to be standardized, and you can't really argue with that.
That's a pretty cool justification for seeking out training from as many of these different groups as you can, because the scenarios are all different. They're bringing their own special flavor, if you will, of here's how you address these scenarios, because the scenarios are different, and the circumstances of the scenario typically tend to drive the type of care and the order in which the care is provided and that kind of stuff. And especially if you're talking about something that's tactically oriented for law enforcement or what have you, each of those incidences that you were talking about, Pulse, Parkland, et cetera, the way law enforcement had to respond to them were slightly different because of what they're doing. You think about it, the Pulse nightclub, adult patrons, hey, drinking thins the blood, so bleeding becomes a little bit more quick and things like that, right? So there's all these little nuances. The Parkland shooting, unfortunately, you got younger, you got kids that you're dealing with and stuff. So I can see why you would want to try to take as many of these different courses as you could, the same way that it's so good in firearms to find good, reputable instructors that can teach you scenario points-driven training for different things, right? To just prepare you for a lexicon of things that might come at you.
And part of being well-rounded and having even just well-rounded medical kits too is going back to what I was talking about earlier about having all those chest seals. For an active shooter incident, if I could have like a bunch of stuff looking at these different wound patterns, I would be leaning towards having more chest seals than tourniquets.
Yeah.
Boston Marathon bombing, I want a crap load of tourniquets.
Right.
And I think it was 18 or 19 people showed up to the hospital with improvised tourniquets. So it also depends on the type of incident. And I understand nobody knows when we're going to be called to action. We don't know, the time or place or what type of incident it's going to be. And if we did, we'd all be 100% prepared all the time. But, just having a couple tourniquets is great, but not if nobody has massive hemorrhaging from an extremity. Having a bunch of chest seals is great, but that doesn't do you any good if somebody's got a femoral bleed. So part of it is being well-rounded in your training, well-rounded in your gear and your kit and stuff too.
So Jason, I think, we could almost beat the equipment thing to death talking about all the different things, seatbelt cutters, cloth cutters, medical shears, clotting bandages, thermal space blankets, all that stuff that you probably want to have in a kit. Maybe let's talk about, as we kind of, it's nuts. I don't want to limit us on time on this episode. So, give me the, the universal sign of, wrap it up, hand across the throat or something if we get too close to the, your bedtime. Right. But, I don't want to run too late, but let's talk about, before we conclude, the kit itself. So we've already talked about your personal IFAK. You have the ankle kit. You've got an IFAK blowout type kit that you put together in essentially a sandwich bag that you can tuck down in a cargo pocket of cargo pants, cargo shorts, that kind of stuff. Moving away from your person into like your vehicle, do you have different size bags that are loaded out differently for different things? And do you take different stuff to different events? And so that question actually came from my wife, who is a registered nurse. She said, I want to know, how do you necessarily pack, or do you pack differently your medical, kit depending on where you're going? And I think she's not really talking about like, I'm going camping in the woods, so maybe I will carry some stuff to make splints with in case I break an arm or a leg, or a burn dressing in case I get too close to campfire. That's kind of maybe a given. But if you're going to go to a concert these days, do you have a bigger kit, in your vehicle? Do you maybe carry a shoulder bag, a sling bag with more stuff in it, especially after the Las Vegas shooting? How would Jason Demo prepare for different events?
So this is actually a really good question, and I'm glad you brought it up. So I have a personal kind of theory on this, and I kind of have a tiered, like almost a pyramid approach to response. And at the bottom of that is I want to be able to treat myself. And then at the end of that is I want to get to advanced level of care. So for example, right now I'm in my office, and behind my laptop, I have a little mini blowout kit. And I know that this is above and beyond for a lot of people. And I know not everybody is going to want to do this. It's expensive, or I'm kind of crazy prepared. But I have one of these in every single room of my house. I have a little mini blowout kit in my daughter's room. Nice. I see you holding up one you got in your office too. But my reasoning for that is I have a huge kit that's in the center of the house, a big trauma bag with multiple of every single item. These little items, or these little blowout kits that I have in the kitchen and the office and the bedrooms and stuff, are meant to hopefully keep me or my wife or daughter alive so I can get to that big kit. That big kit is meant to keep us or anybody alive until a higher level of care gets here.
Yeah.
Because, I can't walk around with a giant stomp bag with, 10 of everything. Like, it's just not practical or whatever. But there's no reason any of us can't carry a large kit in our car.
Right.
But the large kit in my car doesn't do me any good if I'm working in my cubicle at my office, and I can't get there. Maybe I have a small blowout kit in my office that can maybe keep me alive and get me to my car. Now we're staging in the parking lot, waiting for the actual higher level of care, the, paramedics to arrive.
Yeah.
So that's kind of my philosophy. So that's kind of part A to answer your question. Part B, I do carry different things based on where I'm going. So I live in Central Florida. My wife and I, our family, we have annual passes to Disney. We go to Disney a lot. Disney is a non-permissive environment. Can't even carry a pocket knife in there. In fact, sometimes they've given me a hard time about my tourniquet and blowout kit.
Oh, no kidding.
But when they're interesting because it's funny because I fly with this ankle medical kit all the time, and they've never taken my needle or my trauma shears out of it. And I literally, I don't wear it through the metal detector, but it goes through the scanner, and I've never had anything taken away so far. But at Disney, so everywhere I go, let me back up. I either have, like I said earlier, that ankle med kit or my cargo pocket. That's always on me 100% of the time, whether I'm mowing the yard, whether I'm going to the gas station, whether I'm going to church, whether I'm going to the mall or movie or whatever. I always have some type of small blowout kit, IFAC, on my person. And I always have the large kit in my car, period. That's just always. Now, when I go to Disney, I always bring a backpack. I'm a big fan of the Vertex backpacks. I think they're fairly gray man compared to some of the other, like 511 Molly stuff or whatever. They're very well thought out. Again, another extreme thing I do that a lot of people may think is crazy, but I've got the level 3 insert in my Vertex bag for Disney. But I have extra tourniquets in that, and I have extra first aid kits from Odin Medical in that. So, and that's on top of my personal IFAC that's in my either cargo pocket or ankle if I'm, wearing pants. So yes. So for me, if I'm going somewhere, and obviously you never know where an event is going to happen, like I was saying earlier, but if I'm going somewhere that I would consider a little more of a soft target or high risk, like Disney, like a theme park, or a concert or whatever, I will, as long as it's, within reason, if I can carry a shoulder bag or something or whatever, I will carry something extra. And Disney's perfect because I'm not going to pay $87 for a crappy hot dog. So we pack our food and water and drinks and stuff anyway at Disney or whatever. So I need a backpack anyway, and so there's no excuse for me to not have extra medical in that.
So I'm curious, what does the security at Disney say about the medical gear? Because I suspect our listeners are thinking the same thing. If I roll up to a theme park or to a concert venue, and they're going to screen you, they're going to look in your bag and stuff. And they open it up, and they look in there, and they're like, "This guy's got a bunch of medical gear and a trauma plate." What do they say about that?
So Disney has never, knock on wood, they'll probably find it next week now that I said it, but they've never said anything about my backpack body armor, the soft armor. I think that because it's where it is in there, I think they just think it's like a brace. You know how a lot of backpacks come with like a little brace
insert,
for support in it or whatever. So thankfully, they've never said anything about that. I do think they probably worry about that. It's run the gamut for me with the first aid kit, and it all depends on what security guy you get.
Sure.
I've had people not say a word about the tourniquets and IFACs. I've had people say, "What is this?" I've had people say, "This is awesome that you carry this. This is great." And then I've had them freak out and call supervisors over, and I've literally had the entire team come over and be like, "Could you please explain why you have tourniquets?" And I've gotten into it with Disney a few times.
Right.
Like, it really, really gets under my skin. Like, I know you guys are just doing your job, but like, you're already making this a soft target. Like, and I'm bringing first aid stuff. I'm like, Have you had a lot of mass tourniquet killings on the park? Like, or is that concern? Like, you worried I'm gonna go around hanging people or something? Like,
yeah.
I'm like, you guys don't have any tourniquets up here. I'm like, what if something happens right here at the front right now? I'm like, at least I can help out, but
yeah,
I don't want to get off into a tangent because I'll get ticked off. But
no, but I'm just curious. Does in that conversation, does it ever come out that you are retired law enforcement? Does that make a difference?
Normally that's what happens is, or are you a medical professional, or you know, you EMT or paramedic or whatever? And I just say I'm a former first responder and I like to be prepared. And usually that's the end of it. And I used to be a jerk to the Disney guys because they would just get on my nerves when it would happen. But now, I like to think, you know, I grow up a little bit. We get older, a little wiser, and I view it as an opportunity to try to educate somebody. Be like, hey, this is what it is, and this is why I carry it. And you working security, like, you should probably try to seek out some awesome training.
Yeah, you should probably know
learn
about this
stuff, you know. And so I try to use it to educate people and not be a jerk like I used to.
No, that's good. I think, you know, I was kind of chuckling to myself as you were telling the story, and I thought, yeah, if I have to go too far into this with you, I may have to charge you for a consultation. Right. But, yeah. So, yeah, that's awesome. I'm curious about the shears and flying. So they look at those differently, and that's even for my own personal benefit because I fly sometimes.
So TSA allows you to fly with trauma shears.
Really?
You're allowed to carry on trauma shears. They are not prohibited. I have heard mixed things about the decompression needle. Thus far, I have not run into any problems with it, but if they took it, like, it's not going to offend me. Like, I understand why they would take that. Like, I mean, I don't like the TSA, you know, I'm not going to get into that, but like, if they took it, like, I understand why they would take it.
Sleep over that one.
I think it helps because it's not like in your pocket or like next to a multi-tool or something that's going to freak them out. They see, okay, this is part of like the first aid kit. And literally, if you see my ankle kit here, I know your viewers can't see it, but it's literally right up against the trauma shears. So it's like both right there. So like they're going to see it together on the x-ray or whatever. But yeah, I mean, the worst that's going to happen to you is they're just going to take it.
Yeah.
And it's what, a $15 decompression needle, whatever. I've got like 30 of them here. So
yeah, it's not worth losing sleep over. That's fascinating. I'm glad to know that about the trauma shears. I've never tried that. Yeah, it's amazing what I have been able to fly with, and it's amazing also what I've had taken from me. Yeah, we could do a TSA rant episode sometime, maybe. Not really. I'm really not going to do that. But it's just funny. It's funny. I did have a TSA screener once take a small flashlight thing that was given to us at a conference, and it was weird. You know, it was on a keychain, it had a button, and it looked kind of funny, right? Is an odd looking device. And they looked at it, they aimed it at their face, and then they pressed the button and blinded themselves. And you know, I just kind of looked at the lady and I said, yeah, I'm so glad that wasn't a bomb, you know, and that's not something you say to the TSA in the screening line.
You say bomb at the airport?
Yeah, I said bomb at the airport. I said, I guess we're really. I said, well, I guess we're both glad that wasn't a bomb, huh? And so I had to go have a conversation. It was awkward. So
yeah,
I did ask, why would you aim at your face and press the button if you didn't know for sure what it was going to do? And they didn't think that was funny.
Yeah, and just so your listeners know, I use the ankle first aid kit in the airport. I keep it on my ankle, and then as soon as I get up there to the tub stacker part, I just take it off, put it through the x-ray machine, and then as soon as I get all my gear on the other side, just put it right back on. I've never had any issue with it. So cool. I wouldn't recommend going through the body scanner with it on your ankle, because that's going to freak them out. But yeah, it's gone through the x-ray for many flights now, and I haven't had any issues.
Awesome. Well, like you, so I try to keep a couple of these smaller IFAC bags around. I've got one in each vehicle strapped to the driver's seat headrest. So, you know, in a rollover accident or something like that, I can just reach over and grab it. Or, you know, if I, you know, it's on a rip off panel, so I can just grab the thing, rip and go. Never have had to do that. Bigger bag in the car. I've got one of these small bags in my desk drawer at work. And that kind of thing. So, yeah, I mean, it sounds like also, you know, the sky's the limit, really. You know, how big of a bag do you want to put in your vehicle, and how much stuff do you want to put in it? You can't save everybody. I think that's probably worth noting. You know, Murphy's Law is a real pain in the rear. I feel like you couldn't put enough tourniquets, chest seals, and supplies in a bag to deal with every possible catch. But then again, time's a limiting factor, and you can only be in so many places at once yourself. So just kind of keep that in mind. Unless you've got an army of people that all have training and know how to use this stuff, and you're distributing tourniquets and chest seals to other people to go do work, how many can you possibly put on people in a 10-minute period, right?
Yeah.
So
and you never know too. Like, I mean, if we all like to talk about we're going to be the hero in an active shooter incident and run out to our car and go grab our truck gun and body armor and helmet and run back in and smoke the 12 ISIS terrorists in the mall and, save everybody or whatever. But, having a big kid in your car, like, I mean, me personally, I'm trying to get out. Like, I want to get, my family out or whatever. Not that I'm going to be a coward and run away or whatever, but it's always something too. You can grab your kit and throw it to one of the cops or other first responders as you're hauling butt out of the mall parking lot. Be like, hey, here's a big trauma bag. And if you've got a big old bag that's got, 10 of everything in it, you might not get to use it, but you can, throw it to somebody who might be able to use it.
Yeah, very true. All right. Gentlemen, is there anything else that we want to cover on this episode before we bring things to a close? I think that we've opened the door. I don't know that we could possibly discuss it all. Not in one episode, but is there anything else that we want to leave or impart to the listeners, leave with them before we wrap it up?
I think we really kind of.
Go ahead, Mark.
I think, excuse me. I think we just really kind of gave a really good overview on what to expect and what to look for and where to start and how to do it. And I think it was a really good first medical focus show.
Yeah, I agree. I do want to bring up, I don't know if you guys have heard of it, but bleedingcontrol.org.
No.
It's, you can go in there and basically put your zip code or whatever and see if there's bleeding control courses next to you. But because of the National Stop the Bleed campaign, a lot of these courses are actually grant funded and they're literally free.
Oh, wow.
And they're at your local hospital. You go for, it's either 2 or 3 hours. They'll teach you how to use a tourniquet and how to pack a wound, and possibly some of them do pressure dressings as well, but it's just bleeding control, basic. And then you leave the course with a cat tourniquet in a lot of them. And the ones that aren't free are $50, $70, $80 for a 3-hour course. But it's pretty, I've sent dozens, if not a couple hundred people probably that link, because I get questions all the time on Instagram. But yeah, bleedingcontrol.org.
We will throw that in the show notes also, so it's a clickable thing for people to look at. We'll make sure in the show notes that we also include some of these organizations that we've mentioned and ways to find training in your area, either through the Red Cross or some of these other entities like NAEMT and so forth. Golly, yeah. I mean, I don't want to conclude too quickly because I think we had a lot of good information in this episode tonight. But again, I know we could sit here for hours and still, if we really stop, we could keep coming up with things to mention. Jason, thanks, man. I mean, it's good to see you because it has been, nearly 8 months, right? So, but we really.
I don't know if you can tell, but my wife thinks it's a midlife crisis.
The hair?
I've never had long hair. I decided to grow my hair out, so I'm 5 months without a haircut right now.
So I did notice it, yeah. Yeah, the last time that you were on here, you'd shave that thing pretty clean, and now you got the Magnum PI look going on. So, yeah, that's awesome. Mark does that with his beard.
David Hasselhoff.
Oh yeah, the Hoff. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, Mark does that with his beard. 5 days from now, he'll look like the members of ZZ Top. So, yeah. No, it's been good, man. I really appreciate you sharing your time and your knowledge with us. Always good to talk to you. I feel like we need to be more diligent about reaching out to some of our past SMEs and getting them back on with us. We've talked about several of our past guests and having them back on. So, Jason, anytime you want to come on, feel free. I'd like to sometime talk to you just about what it's like being in the firearms, photography, marketing, world, and hear about that. That would be exciting to me. So I may be the only guy.
The best part about it, and Mark's going to agree with you, is everything's a tax write-off.
Yeah, I bet, right? So
every single round.
Yeah, look at all the guns behind Mark that he's probably written off. So which room of the fortress are you in there now, Mark? Is that the?
I don't know what this one is.
I'm not sure about that one. Yeah, folks, it's the green screen that Mark treats us every time we do this with video so that we can see each other as we do the interview. You've had the president behind you. It's pretty amazing. So yeah, I like the green screen. I'm gonna have to get one of those. Be a lot better than looking at this mess behind me. All right, gentlemen.
Dave, are you gonna try to make it the shot or no?
I was looking at the schedule earlier. I might. I just don't know. I know for a fact I'm going to go to the NRA, annual meeting in Indianapolis this year or next year.
Cool.
But
I actually just booked my flight for that.
Oh, did you? Okay. Yeah, we're going to go up there and the wife's on board with that. She'll be going and be a lot of fun. I would love to do SHOT. I'm going to put that down as a maybe. I would really love to do it. I haven't been yet. And so, I feel like it's something I should do, but we'll see. Hopefully.
Cool.
Yeah. If I go, I'll try to sneak out there with a pair of trauma shears on my ankle. See what happens. Be a field trip exercise. So, all right, guys.
Yeah.
So, how can people connect with you after the show, Jason? I know you've got pretty rocking Instagram presence, and I know you're also on Facebook. Instagram's where I go if I want to catch up with what you're doing. So, how can people find you?
Yeah, I'm at Jason Demo, DEMO at Instagram. My website, www.jason-demo.com. I do a lot of photography and social media management, specifically for the firearms community, a lot of product photography, training photography, stuff like that, along with the social media management. So I love working in this industry and helping out there's a lot of good people and good companies. So I enjoy it.
No Instagram feed has made me want smoke bombs more than yours, Jason. the Enola Gay smoke bombs. I could spend a lot of money right there just on smoke bombs. I'd find ways to use them.
Shirts? I've been trend setting with the Hawaiian shirts.
The Hawaiian shirts are pretty awesome. Your Glock, your Glock that you had done up in the Star Wars Rebel theme, that thing is pretty freaking awesome too. But
I thought it was pretty awesome when he was getting popped in the head with that helmet on.
Oh yeah, Rich just hammering him. Yeah,
that took like 15 takes to get the camera angle right, and I woke up the next day and I was like, why do I hurt so bad? I literally was like, thought I got hit by a freight train. I was like, oh yeah, and Navy SEAL was punching me for an hour yesterday.
Right, yeah. Folks, you've got to head over to Jason's Instagram feed. Check it out. It's awesome. Two words summarize it: gun porn. It is that is the best way to see some excellent photography of firearms, tactical gear, folks in the industry that are actual door kickers and medics and stuff doing work. It is really neat stuff. So I like it. It's one of the pages or one of the feeds on Instagram I hit like on a at least a weekly basis, if not every day. I'm checking to see what you're doing. So stalking you, I guess, is what I just said.
I appreciate the kind words, and I'll give you the $100 that I promised you for saying that later.
Yeah.
So thanks.
Not a problem, man. Mark, how about you, man? How do folks connect with you after the show?
info@squaredawaycustoms.com is always the best way to reach me. Shoot me an email, have any questions or so on and so forth. You can always get me there.
Yep, absolutely. Folks, if you head over to squaredawaycustoms.com, be sure to use that Shooters Nation discount code and order all the Kydex. So with the holidays coming up, this show should release in December. You've got a little bit of time left to, gift cards and place an order and drop the order receipt in an envelope and give that away. We're not going to commit Mark to delivering by Christmas Eve. That's the realm of Santa Claus. But, you can at least give somebody the notification that, hey, I did this for you. So good way to help people get cool stuff for Christmas. So for Shooters Nation, you know how to connect with us. ShootersNation.com. head over there. Special thanks to the patrons who directly support the show. Again, you guys make future episodes possible. If you want to support the show financially, you can do that by visiting shootersnation.com, looking for the donate button. That'll take you over to Patreon and allow you to throw a couple bucks our way each month. It keeps me off the streets, and I'm an ugly date, so I don't earn very much money out there. Shooters Nation also is a great place to send us your ideas for future episodes. Use the feedback link to tell us how we're doing, what you think about the show, any subjects you want us to talk about in the weeks ahead. You're really helping us out for free when you do that, because you're making our jobs a lot easier. Be sure to sign up for the Mail Blast mailing list while you're there. That's where we do announcements about upcoming shows, live events, special promotions, etc. Just as a bit of closing business, you will probably be listening to this, like I said, in December. We will be taking some time off around Christmas and the New Year so we can spend time with our families and remind them of who we are and all that fun stuff. We will be catching you again right after the first of the new year. But I can tell you that the week of Christmas, the week after, that Christmas, New Year's time frame, we will be radio silent. And we hope that you're doing something other than listening to podcasts as well. If you're just discovering us, guess what? There's like 36, 37 some odd episodes before this one that you can go listen to. And so that's your assignment. Listen to all that during the holidays. But anyway, gentlemen, again, it was a pleasure. I always enjoy talking to you guys. And for the audience, we've enjoyed talking to you. Hope that you guys enjoyed it as well. Until we speak to you again, be safe out there.
The preceding segment was a production of the Shooters Nation podcast. Visit us online at shootersnation.com.